Right. Hello, my name is Bettina Nissen from Newcastle University, and I'm presenting our paper today called Data Things, Digital Fabrication Situated Within Participatory Data Translation Activities. And I'd like to thank my co-author at this point, John Bowers, for his valuable contribution to this work. With this paper, we are introducing our notion of data things that we have developed through two design-led case studies, which were concerned with extending perspectives on physical data representation and digital fabrication in HCI. We aim to explain how we have arrived at this concept of data things as situating digital fabrication within shared social data translation activities, encouraging reflection and conversation with specific contexts, and investing personal meaning through participants' active involvement in the making of an artifact. In part, this paper is leading on from previous work where we have situated digital fabrication within an exhibition trajectory as souvenir-making activity to enrich audience experiences. While that work focused on fabrication in a visitor trajectory of engagement, the projects I'm introducing here today are not only an extension of this work, but are also following on from what Ogawa et al. Introduced as social fabrication, highlighting the shared and social potential of fabrication to stimulate conversation and discussion. An increasing area in research in HCI is extending this discourse around social and shared practices of fabrication into physical data representations, or as we here suggest, data translations, to investigate how and why we should print things from data to engage people and audiences, as suggested by Cott et al. I'm now going to show how we extend on some of these concepts by describing and discussing our two case studies, both situated in different social contexts. Our first case study was situated in a conference program at a national technology conference called Thinking Digital. Throughout this conference every year, the delegates form part of a fairly close-knit community which engages with one another extensively online, in particular via Twitter. For this reason, we were interested in exploring how these online conversations could be translated into physical forms in order to engage delegates in offline conversations. After a series of design explorations, we developed this custom shape generation software that would create 3D shapes from the delegates' tweet behavior. The unique shape is generated by incorporating and creating two graphs of the amount of tweets over 24 hours. The inner graph showing the individual amounts of tweets with the conference's hashtag, and the outer graphing the overall conference tweets in comparison. And attendees could create their personalized conference tweet translations throughout the conference by simply entering their Twitter username to generate their shape on screen, which was then 3D printed live for the attendees to watch while engaging in conversation. We developed this wearable clip design for two reasons. Firstly, to keep the artifact suitable for a conference setting, where delegates already often wear name badges, whilst also taking into account the time constraint of the fabrication technology itself in terms of size and shape of the artifact. And secondly, we wanted the shapes to be wearable in order to act as visual clues to support engagement with other delegates while leaving the artifact itself somewhat ambiguous and open for different application and uses. I'm now briefly going to highlight a small amount of findings relating to this study, but would like to refer to the paper for further detail at this point. So as you could see in the previous slide, conference attendees wore their shapes in different ways, but they also used them to compare their Twitter behavior through the printed artifacts, with one attendee telling us that he's not very good at talking to people at conferences if he doesn't know anyone, but this shape gave him something to talk to people about and start a conversation. So we found that not only did the artifacts instigate these kind of conversations, but were additionally used to create different interpretations. For example, this attendee showing us his Twitter fangs, another imagining a murder mystery, or a participant more personally describing their data as embodied tweets about technology, innovation, beer, and cake. This suggests what one participant emphasized when he said, "It's good that design is abstract so you can make up your own interpretation." In some cases, the created data things found different uses beyond the conference. For example, one company placed their unique artifact quite dominantly and proudly on their business logo in their offices when they got back home. While our experience at the conference setting gave promising indication that people shared conversations and invested meaning in their data things, we moved on to a longer-term, more focused setting to explore this potential in more depth. The limitations of the short-term engagement with participants and duration time of live fabrication in such a public setting led us to explore a more iterative design process in a more personal setting, extending participation to additional aspects of this translation process. We therefore selected a case study translating movement data from craft practitioners into a range of artifacts, which allowed us to engage participants with their data in numerous ways and develop a range of different data translations and activities. More specifically, we worked with a local group of 6 crochet practitioners over an extended period of time where we experimented with different ways of engaging the practitioners with data collected from their movements. Over the course of roughly 3 months, we also worked with colleagues who were interested in exploring sound as a reflective data feedback tool for craft practice. However, I won't describe these sonification explorations here in more detail as they're subject of another paper that you can see here. Throughout our workshops, we collected data via a small accelerometer gyroscope device that we attached to the practitioner's crochet hook to be at least invasive in order to stream data to our laptop. We explored not only different ways of translating this data into physical artifacts, but also different levels of interactive engagement and participation. We iteratively developed a set of artifacts and activities to explore in response to practitioners' feedback throughout the workshops. In our initial design, we translated the accelerometer data as coordinates, drawing out the movements as engraved threads in these that we fabricated into a range of different materials, which we tried to use to explore insights into materiality of fabrication in relation to craft practice. In this first step, the participants were not involved in the translation or design process, and although the different shapes led to conversation and discussion of their crochet techniques, one participant raised her concern, why doesn't it look more like crochet, which we considered for our next design iteration. In this second design, we chose to translate the X, Y, and Z accelerometer data into concentric radial graphs as a more direct, potentially more legible translation of the data by still creating a unique shape that adapted some of the aesthetics of their craft, similar to some of the radial crochet patterns. When comparing these translations with the first iteration, our participants found that these were more legible as they could almost see the stitches, which allowed them to better reflect on their techniques or practice in correlation with others. For example, one participant stated, "I was thinking about my crochet. I do keep my hands quite still and quite close, and that's maybe why the shape is kind of quite narrow." After exploring these pre-designed data translations that we took to the workshop, we took the participants through the entire process of interactive data generation, selection, and fabrication as transparent as possible. Overall, this gave them a better understanding of the data capturing and translation processes, as well as the creative aesthetic choices we made in our designs for fabrication. They had creative input into these forms and materials they wanted to choose. The participants drove this design process of their own data things and were involved in the more transparent process of generating the data, the selection, translation, and fabrication, which led to more meaningful artifacts. As one participant stated, going through the whole process of seeing it happening, seeing the difference, how it looked on screen, deciding, and then laser cutting, it felt like it has more meaning. Beyond the duration of the workshop, we also found that the artifacts in some instances did take on more personal meaning than we had envisioned, with one participant describing her artifact as representing her struggle and more or less succeeding to learn a skill she had always admired and associated with her granny or mum. She liked that it visualizes a tradition and is written in secret crochet code placed on her mantelpiece for her to feel proud of. This shows a very personal meaning and emotional value that these data things have stimulated. To summarize, I will draw on these findings and more depth findings from our paper, joining 5 key threads we have formulated from these 2 contrasting studies. Firstly, we have found that participants in both studies made their own interpretations and created meaning throughout the making process in different ways, highlighting the important relationship between the active involvement in the translation of data and the meaning invested in the tangible artifacts and their overall experience. Although data translations were encountered more ready-made in the conference setting than in the real-time data generation in the craft context, a curiosity and interest in the translation processes we designed in both cases indicated that the participation in data generation, translation, and fabrication processes enriches participants' opportunities for meaning-making. By reflecting on conversations with the participants about the creative and aesthetic judgments involved in capturing the data, the selection, scaling, mapping, display, and finally fabrication of the data things, in addition to possible future uses imagined and suggested by participants, for example, as printing blocks, brooches, or coasters, we found that a balance between meaningful data engagement and a level of ambiguity to stimulate future uses and meaning is important to situate data in a trajectory of use that is mindful to the specific needs of the setting. This led us to consider our work as data translation, and I wish to clarify here our reasoning for this term rather than using more common phrases of data materialization or physical data representations. We refrain from using the simplistic divide of material and immaterial because it often reduces the digital or virtual to the immaterial and artifacts to fixed material embodiments of immaterial data. We consider our data things as fixed We don't consider our data things as fixed representations of experience, reflections, and conversations they may inscribe, but as more personal interpretations. In that sense, we see data not as fixed, but as malleable medium open to translations and interpretation. With this perspective, we not only suggest a more active role of the participant in the translation of their artifact, but we also recognize our active and subjective role in the interpretation of and design with data. This prompted us to further reflect on the overall engagement we conducted as part of our research practice. In particular, in the extended second case study, we found that we aesthetically learned and were inspired by the practitioners as much as they learned from our practice and materials and designs. Our approach of not merely printing out data we had gathered from measuring participants' practice, but more actively and creatively engaging them in what we have come to consider as our craft of data translations, fostered a more reciprocal relationship for example, one participant making a block print from her data thing in a print studio, which you can see in the background here. Other research in HCI has considered hybrid craft practices, combining, mediating, or facilitating traditional craft practices with or through digital technologies. We, however, speculate that the practitioner's curiosity in our research practice became increasingly reciprocal and intertwined, highlighting the potential of hybrid practices which combine craftwork with research practices in novel ways. Lastly, I'd like to emphasize and explain the notion of data things that we would like to introduce with this work. The concept is extending perspectives from social sciences, such as Ingold, who argue deeper meaning is invested through partaking in the making processes of an artifact, shifting it from a mere mass-produced object to becoming a living thing for someone through their participation in the making thereof, or in our case, translation and fabrication. We believe that the conference attendees and crochet practitioners we work with orient towards our artifacts as data things by investing their own personal meaning through the direct involvement in the shared making of their data thing. To conclude, we have shown with our work that the notion of data things is a novel approach to viewing physical data representations as participatory and meaningful practice, and that by referring to our work as data things, we hope to open out further conversation in HCI around data translations as richer, more participatory engagements of audiences with and through data. We'd like to emphasize the qualities of data things as being situated in social, shared data translation and fabrication activities, encouraging reflection and conversation for people within specific contexts, and receiving their personal meaning through people's active involvement in their making. Thank you very much.
So yeah, we still have time for questions. Okay, maybe I start. So I found it quite interesting, this kind of notion of having a more abstract versus a more concrete artifact. So I was wondering if like concrete artifacts maybe are perceived more as like showing off a little bit, like, you know, the whole badges that we attach to our, like the small ribbons that we attach to our badges. And if like the more abstract artifacts maybe foster more interpretations. Can you maybe elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, we try to make artifacts that weren't too specific, so people could just look at it and see what it was in order to get people talking about them. Whereas with these, I guess you can see this says presenter on here, so you don't have to ask a question. So we kept them a bit ambiguous in order to encourage these kind of conversation and discussions.
My name is Kunu Park. I'm from KAIST. Actually, I have a question about the portion of data between the aesthetic and material of the design. I mean, like, it seems like very the fabrication, the shape of the fabrication seems very similar with different data. So, how much did the data itself mattered in the how the data affected to the users?
If I understand you correctly, you're asking how much the data changed the artifact, or did the artifact change a lot with different input of data?
Yes, I mean the interesting thing was the many users understood differently with the same similar fabrication. So how much the data affected rather than the aesthetic and materials of the fabrication?
The data itself, especially with the crochet practice work, the data itself, we didn't use the data as being the only point that we wanted them to look at, but rather use it as a starting point for a conversation and as reflection. So with the Twitter data, you could definitely see differences, and people were comparing their data by aligning the different shapes. Or seeing the data being translated differently. Is that?
Okay, I think I could kind of understood.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so let's thank Bettina again.